think we'll start with the press council. And Julian, I'm going to come to you for the first to have first bite of this press council. You're still relatively new to the role. What I'd like to know is what kind of job do you see the press council having done in recent years, and is it fit for purpose?
I think many members of the council would agree that we haven't done well enough in the past, although we've done better than most people think, because one of the ways in which we haven't done well is in getting across what we do. And part of that, for example, is that to the extent the public sees what we do at all, it's through our adjudications, and yet 90% of complaints are not dealt with that way. They're dealt with usually much more quickly and informally and often very satisfactorily. And we haven't been getting that out well enough. We also haven't, even our adjudications have not been published prominently enough, but there's a very big change afoot there. I think you see it epitomised just in the last 2 days. If you look at the Telegraph, for example, which has run 2 adjudications, one today and one yesterday, they're the new model where we do insist on due prominence. The newspapers have signed up to a contractually enforceable obligation that they will publish our adjudications prominently and with us defining what prominence is in that particular case. So that's been a very important step forward, but we've still got a long way to go. Firstly, in improving the speed and the vigour of our complaints, improving the monitoring of the impact of our standards. There's no point setting standards if you're not looking at whether they're working or not. They may be too hard, too tough, or too weak. And we've certainly got to look into that, and we've got to extend ourselves more in the online area. We've done better in the online area than might be thought. We've had a lot of the newspaper websites are 3 of the top 6 visited news websites, and 9MSN will be joining us shortly, subject to finalising arrangements. So we've actually done quite a lot in online already, but we're very pleased that, Mumbrella and Fray and others have joined us, and we need to expand that.
Matthew, what's your sense? Obviously, you've observed the press council over the years as a journalist, and now in your new role, you've looked quite closely. What sort of job has the press council done?
Apart from Professor Disney, who came and made a couple of presentations to the media inquiry, other previous chairs of the press council did as well. Professor Dennis Pearce, Professor Ken McKinnon, and Professor David Flint, all of whom had been chairs of the press council, and all but one of them, one of those 4 people, told the inquiry that there were significant problems with the press council, with some of them Julian has already alluded to, in the form of the fact that its funding was too low, that people didn't really know what the press council was or what it did or what it stood for. So as a means, as a complaints handling mechanism, if it's not well known, that's a fatal blow, in the sense that you just it's not effective in that sense. Funding was an issue. The fact that the members of the council from the news media industry could come and go, there was no compulsion on them to remain in it, because it was and is a voluntary self-regulatory model, and that in some cases that had happened. And what particularly Dennis Pearce, but also Ken McKinnon, presented to us was that was at least partly, if not wholly, because of adjudications that the council had made that various members didn't agree with.
Campbell, has it worked fine?
As Julian said, I was there, and I absolutely own up and have no problem in doing so, that news under my direction was instrumental in cutting the funding of the press council. You will remember GFC1, when at a meeting on the Gold Coast, when a few kilometres away from the press council's Gold Coast meeting, the editor of the Gold Coast Bulletin was laying off a lot of staff, and I felt at that time, as did many others, that the press council had become a very polite and comfortable debating society. That's unfair, and I don't mean that as unfairly as it sounds. But I felt that it had become a bit remote from the real work of standards and complaints, and that it's 22 or more people around a table debating an issue. It seemed structurally there were some problems, and I want to stress that from the moment that Julian was appointed, I, instrumental in cutting the funding, have been instrumental in now doubling the funding. And it's been an extraordinarily vigorous and tough process that both the SMH and Fairfax and News, as the major proprietors, have begun this process well before the government launched these inquiries.
I want to bring Peter for Fairfax's side of this.
I want to tease out one point which I think is very salient to all this debate, and that is the difference between perception and standard. And I think I know that under Julian, the standards of the Press Council and the standards of the people who work for the Press Council and the criteria by which the media is going to be judged moving forward, and I agree with all the speakers that this is still very much a work in progress, but the standards by which the media will be judged in the, if you like, the envelope of the self-regulation body is improving greatly. And I think this is a great offset against some of the commentary that is primarily in the Finkelstein report, that the perception of the media is so woeful. Well, perceptions are one thing. As Greg Harwood and others have said, journalists don't exist to be loved, and no one expects to love journalists. Don't expect to be loved. What we do, though, what is incumbent upon us, is to hold high standards that are policed internally, and if they fail, then are policed externally in the Press Council. And so I think the whole perception issue can be exploded by more work, increased work on the standards issue. And I think standards are the real issue for the industry, rather than some sort of perception that kind of shifts and wanes, what have you, and is informed by events overseas and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute.
Clearly, for self-regulation to have a shot at working, it needs the whole industry to be behind it. We saw Seven West Media, they own the West Australian, withdraw from the Press Council. Campbell, firstly, from the point of view of self-regulation, do you need all of the major players there? And secondly, you must have findings which go against what you would want. Are you always comfortable accepting that umpire's decision?
I was disappointed that Seven West made their decision. West Australians quite regularly make decisions not to be involved too much with the rest of Australia, so there's a context there. I think the test for the West Australian and Seven West is to see that the standards body that they have set up with some very prominent West Australians, does that deliver to the consumers of West Australia and their other media's arms and hold them to good standards. And if they do, as uncomfortable as that, we're here to ensure standards and that the consumers and readers are well served. If they do, then that's the way it is. But yes, I was disappointed. On the other matter, yes, like Julian and I have robust discussions about the fact that I think complaints or adjudications are wrong, and after the event, I make my feelings very plain.
Something that happens whenever I write a story on Mumbrella about a Press Council ruling, about an ACMA ruling when it's broadcast, is there's a finding that something's been breached. And then the comment thread that follows is, so what happens next? Well, have they been fined? Are they in trouble? What is it? And it's the fact that there's a finding of a breach of the principles, and that seems to be the end of the story. I guess someone would look at the telly findings of this week that there was unacceptable language used in the headlines around asylum seekers, not separating fact from opinion when it comes to the bike lanes, etc. It kind of puzzles the people who aren't involved in the regulation that there isn't some other sanction than the finding. Campbell, do you think there should be?
No.
Why not?
Because it misinterprets and disempowers the fact that a professional organisation has to publicly declare that it has breached a set of standards. And a footballer hates giving away a penalty. A doctor hates being found that there's been that he's breached some procedures. All of the people who say that the Press Council is a toothless tiger haven't been bitten by it. And an editor and a newspaper absolutely hates having to devote space to somebody else's opinion and assessment that the newspaper has done the wrong thing. And is a very, very public and very, very prominent and very, very painful procedure to go through. And we have signed up for it. And frankly, there are not too many other organisations, professional organisations, where the referee's ruling is that prominent and that in your face and that difficult. Yeah, journalists hate being called to task like that, and the challenge for us to be upfront and quick, and on the first side of it, admit when we are wrong and correct it, and then accept the referee's ruling. Beyond that is an attack on fundamental freedoms of our society.
Okay, Julian, I'll come to you. Are you toothless?
No, but we're not, as strong and as effective as we should be. But I think the important thing is firstly to get such powers as we do have to be using them properly. That's what I'm focusing on.
Would you like more powers, more strict sanctions?
I'll come to that in a moment. But in terms of the publishing of adjudication, the staff at the council now, as yesterday, have spent most of the morning tracking down, because we just released some adjudications, not only tracking down that the print adjudication is adequate, making sure that what we required on the home page of the website is adequate. We've gone back to them in 2 cases because it's only a single line when it's meant to be a bigger thing with our logo, bigger stuff homepage, checking that the link from that homepage to the adjudication is adequate, checking then that our adjudications are also linked to the original article. So, and we're going to do this all the time now, very detailed requirements, and we're insisting that they be complied with to the letter. And we're saying what headlines we want. We're not saying exactly what page we want, but for example, with one recently we said it's got to be in the top half of the first 5 pages. So we're getting better on that.
Let me just bring in Peter on the same point I put to Campbell. Does it actually hurt that much having to publish the correction?
Look, I think the way to look at this is self-interest. We put ourselves up. We have values and ethics. They're published on our website. They're in the paper. We talk about our duty to uphold democracy, freedom of the press, and all these very highfalutin, very valuable ideas that we have in our society. Therefore, it's in our interest to fess up when we're wrong. It's in our interest to do everything that we can do to improve the standards we have. I mean, it's sort of this the logic, the alternative logic escapes me really, that we wouldn't have an interest in doing that. And yes, it hurts.
Okay, in a sentence from each of you, does the public trust the media?
The evidence of the opinion polls that were looked at, analysed quite extensively in an independent media inquiry report is that no, the public doesn't. And it's not a question of whether journalists are loved or hated. It's a question of trust. And as Peter alluded to in his answer just then, it goes to the credibility of the press. It's not about whether they're loved or hated.
Campbell,
that's something that you're supporting.
Does the public trust you?
They trust us a lot more than they will tell you they trust us.
Julian?
I'm going to duck it because I want to say one sentence on something else that's very important, and that is that I want to make sure there isn't misleading impression about the impact of the Finkelstein inquiry and the convergence review. We were moving in the direction we've spoken about. We've moved further and faster than we would if those inquiries hadn't been held. We wouldn't have got as big an increase in funding, in my view, and we wouldn't have got the commitments not to get out at less than 4 years' notice without those reviews and inquiries. So I just want to make that clear, but it's also important to emphasise, because it's overlooked, that we were moving quite a bit with very strong support, particularly from News Limited, before that.
Peter, and again, if I can move the microphone.
Can I take that a different way? Does the public need us? And the answer is yes. And yes, look, the trust issue is, look, I think they trust us more than they let on, but clearly there are people who are prepared to say the alternative view, and Matthew has cited a lot of surveys that said that. I don't, I still don't think. I think that people need us and want us, and the concept of not having us is a very, it's a grave, grave thought. And so I think people love us really